This video will be covering the following subject: Tesla, scalar technology, scalar fields, and scalar waves. Zero-point energy, UFOs, and all sorts of things. I'm going to read the conclusion first because when I do this video, this is the 11th take. People are compelled to scream very loudly when they detect someone talking to a camera or a computer. And also the idea of the scalar interferometer. Some of you may be coming to this video for these terms, so I'm going to get to the point with them. An interferometer is a device that measures the interference pattern from two sources of energy, or uses a source of energy, creates an interference pattern, and measures how things affect it. It's a device for measuring things. So saying interferometer is literally the direct equivalent to saying voltmeter. That's literally the end of that part of it. If you have any questions about this, look up interferometer and stop looking at YouTube videos that tell you something else. They are lying. Scalar. What does scalar mean? Well, what's the voltage in your power line in your house if you're in North America and the United States? It's probably 120 volts AC, 60 cycles at some amperage, like 15. A scalar value for it is just 120 volts. Never mind the fact that it's a wave, yeah, I'm using that word, and it goes from 0 volts up to 170, and then back down to 0 volts and goes to negative 170, or approximately thereof. And it's only 120 volts 4 times in each cycle. But its scalar value, based on root mean square average-like kind of behavior to figure out the actual power energy coming out of it, the equivalent for DC power, says it's 120 volts. That's what scalar means. That's one good example of it. I'm using examples because that cuts through the scalar interferometer weapon idea. It's not a weapon, it's a device for measuring. At that point, it would be a measurement that would ignore polarity and phase. Okay, what about scalar waves and scalar fields? Okay, a scalar field theory exists in physics. It's considered a sound or somewhat or semi-complete theory. It has rules and ideas and measurements and stuff that are expected. It proposes an idea that can be tested, and no scalar field has ever been observed in nature. But the Higgs boson may provide the first evidence of such a field. Or not. That's it. That's the entire thing. A scalar field theory refers to a field theory that would be scalar only, meaning you could treat it as if it has no other characteristics except whatever its magnitude is. In physics, a quantity described as a scalar quantity contains information about its magnitude only. A vector quantity, there's other names for it, contains at least one other piece of information, such as direction and magnitude, or phase angle, or something else about it, like voltage and current, that sort of thing, or magnetic field and polarity, or phase angle. Scalar wave in physics would be defined, if you were going to use that word, those two words together, in that way as an expression, as being the result of, or the answer to, a scalar wave equation. Because you could take a scalar wave equation and have it put out what you could call at that point a scalar wave. But most people would just call it a plot of the absolute values. That's it. By these definitions being very, very vague at that point in this specific example, it wouldn't be any use without something added to it. This is a little bit like saying, somebody asking you, well, how much is it? Oh, it's 4. For what? It's 4. Well, is it $4, 4 cents? What are you talking about? I'm not answering. It's meaningless without the last piece or something before it. Without context, it doesn't mean anything, and that is specifically why it's being used. I'm going to be getting to the comment or a question that was brought up today, or actually many days ago, that brought this up, but here we go. Scalar wave, that expression in those quotes, is used almost exclusively. In fact, it is used exclusively by cranks and peddlers of woo. The reason they use it is, by itself, it's nonsensical. It doesn't mean anything. Period. Saying scalar interferometer is literally throwing two words together that don't normally go together and don't really mean anything unless you're attempting to try to make sense of it, like I have, and even then it's kind of half-assed. As for scalar field theories, there is an example of that, but a scalar field, again, by itself, doesn't mean anything. Because it doesn't. It's not a field of scaled values, or a scalar that produces a field. These are essentially examples of nonsensical statements made from actual, real statements that mean something. Or, in another way of saying it, taking something that has a definition and ignoring the entire definition because you can use it to create a search engine effect. In wrestling, if someone isn't injured, you can create an injury and work on it. Yeah? Those of you who actually watch wrestling when you were a kid. When it comes to search engine optimization, if you can't beat them, ignore them and create your own search engine activity. Just insert words together, like Tesla. Tesla is the name of a company, and it's also a name of several products, lots of copyright stuff, but it's also a person who existed who actually did things. He was also a showman who came up with lots of ideas that never went anywhere, and he acknowledged that they didn't go anywhere. But people like bringing up the idea that Tesla made a death ray or Tesla made an earthquake machine. He didn't. He talked about being able to do so, that it should be possible, but he never made it work. Because he did not. This is like people finding out that there was some sort of death ray machine in his home or something of that nature, and finding out it was a decade resistance box. And then when people talk about that on YouTube, they specifically use the wrong terminology for what it was so that they can make that search engine optimized and make a myth about it. Myths and legends are entertaining, but they also have another effect. You can effectively harness a myth or a legend because lying about something that was never true in the first place isn't something you can be sued over. So here we go for the comment, if nobody immediately needs to come up and scream in my ear. The powers that be suppressing your technologies and hiding stuff from us. This is the meme. So I'm going to bring up a simple example. Think about this slowly. Steam power and coal versus gasoline that was a cleaning fluid. Now we're going to go on with this. I don't have a specific example concerning the subject, someone says, but I have watched videos about Tesla, and yes, I do tend to get drawn into UFO videos. The ones that discuss the technology supposedly driving them are scalar technologies and zero-point energy. And then the person says, I'm sure I'm not using those terms correctly. I've already covered that. I'm covering it before I do the commentary here. But I'm not a scientist here. Nobody has to be. It's, unfortunately, you're being manipulated by what a lot of people would treat like mainstream fake news. This is the alternative fake news. Sorry. But besides muddying the waters, this is a very good series of questions, and it involves so much in one set that this took a while to do. You could argue, Waptec could argue, that it's all a conspiracy theory. No, I'm not. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's marketing. And he says, she says, I lack the background and knowledge to make a credible argument against Waptec. You don't have to. We're both discovering this together. I treat it that way when I deal with someone who's putting the best foot forward, or at least being reasonable. But if there was ever a breakthrough technology being kept secret, it would be zero-point energy and scalar technology. Now I'm going to cover this real quick. Scalar technology is, again, two words slapped together that don't mean anything when you combine them. That's like meat bicycle. It means something to gamers, but it doesn't really mean anything in the real world. Scalar technology doesn't mean anything. It's an incomplete statement. Zero-point energy, however, isn't. Zero-point energy simply refers to the fact that even if you evacuate space itself of matter, there's always some level of background energy in it, even if you shield it. For some reason, this universe is teeming with some sort of vibration, you could call it, if you want to call it that. And it doesn't want to go away. Can this be exploited? The answer is no. Most of these energy levels, if you were to talk about them, I'm going to invoke the meme of scalars. If you were talking about the magnitude of how much change is caused in time and space, it's too small to actually exploit. You can detect it, but you can't really use it. For the same reason, you can detect a flashlight at 6 miles, but you can't really heat up a cup of coffee with it. Because you can't. Is it a matter of technology? No. That sort of energy level gets drowned out by the energy we're sitting in on this planet. The fact that it's not below zero right now is a higher energy level by a trillion-fold over what the scalar, over what the zero-point energy is. And as for, again, for scalar technology, this is an example of mixing words together. But zero-point energy, or zero-point as an idea, does exist. Most importantly, a best example is, if you have a lone hydrogen atom sitting up in deep space at the coldest temperature possible, does the electron still orbit it? The answer is yes. Does it orbit it enough to keep it warm? Technically compared to absolute zero that we could conceive of, yes. Can you exploit it? No, it's a single electron orbiting the core of a hydrogen atom, which is just a proton in this case. It does not have the ability to be exploited because the amount of movement it causes from right to left nullifies itself out, and it effectively has no real energy output. That's it. That's a perfect example of why zero-point energy would have to try to extract the energy from, let's say, a hydrogen atom by effectively ripping the electron off. That's not going to work to generate energy. Doing it without matter, zero-point energy in time-space, is even less likely to produce anything. And it's even more nullifying because it's completely chaotic. In fact, it's defined as a chaotic event. I'll include a link below for that information if you want to look through it. And then I'm going to go through these statements first and left. As for a technological secret based on suppressing this information, I'm going to bring up my favorite invocable meme. Gasoline originally was a cleaning fluid, and it was a byproduct of producing tar and oils and other useful materials, but it wasn't really thought of as a fuel. It exploded. Kerosene was one of the compounds that could be extracted. It could be used for fuel. But nobody thought of using it for driving an engine. And then someone got the bright idea, take a piston-driven steam engine, and instead of giving it steam, pour in the fuel and let it detonate and let it expand. There's a lot more energy in it than there is in an external combustion engine, boiling water and then running the pistons. That wastes a bunch of processes. Find a way to exploit the fuel by exploding it. This is the reason we can use gas engines, that sort of thing. In fact, one of the first internal combustion engine experiments was using wood gas by overheating wood, getting out the burnable vapor and detonating it instead. But what happened when the big coal companies found out about oil being turned into a fuel, like kerosene? Well, okay, but oh no, gasoline. They went ahead and created a cabal to get rid of every other form of transportation, create gas stations, and create cars. Yeah, there was a conspiracy. The fuel companies caused it to exploit the new technology. What's the other thing they did? At the same time, they demonized it so nobody else would compete with them. What do oil companies demonize? Solar, wind, water, every other form of energy. Why? Because they want to monopolize it, patent it, copyright it, or exploit it by creating as much power control as possible. How many companies, if you look into them, that are trying to put up wind farms in your area are actually run by oil companies trying to get out of the oil business? Almost all of them. They're called energy companies, not oil companies. You're looking at the wrong conspiracy, and you're being lied to by the marketing department for the oil companies. Yes, the oil companies are convincing you that the oil companies suppress technologies, because it makes everyone look like an idiot when they argue that point. Sorry, this has happened before. Look up the cabal that got rid of all of the electric-driven vehicles and electric-driven cars and light rail and buses that ran on cabling. No, that really did happen. I'll put a link below in the description. We still need to make plastic bottles to throw in the ocean, etc. ad nauseum. Counterpoint, we can use glass. We can also make plastic bottles that actually decay, so that's not a real issue. What would they do if the petrodollar fell? The economic collapse would arrive early. That's what people said when coal was going under. They just adapted. This is a meme that's been dead for literally a century. Anyway, not for sure exactly what we were looking for, but this is the first thing that came to mind. This is the first thing that most people have come to mind. This is a good set of questions. I hope I provided some information for everyone. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yeah, most of the people pushing these ideas are the oil companies. Why wouldn't they be?